Markova was arrested by the Soviet authorities during the Stalin period.
Those concentration camps, that was so hard, many people died.
She was humble. She was loving. She always considered others.
For the longest time, we had no idea where she was.
I want to know and experience the goodness that motherhood can provide.
This week, I'm flying over the awesome peaks of the Kootenay Rockies to visit a little-known community in south-central British Columbia. It was the rich mineral resources that attracted the first Europeans here in the late 1800s. The area was already populated by the Salish and Kootenay First Nations peoples. In towns like Grand Forks, you can also see evidence of a Russian community that settled in the Kootenay region a century ago. They are the Doukhobors, or spirit wrestlers. Their ancestors split off from the Russian Orthodox Church in the 1600s because they didn't want to pray to icons, and they didn't feel that they needed priests to help them communicate with God.
The Doukhobors are Russian dissidents that said we don't need the structure of the church because the church was at that time quite corrupt. The title was used actually against them because the church hierarchy said these people were against the church because they were wrestling against.
Over the years, the Doukhobors developed their own unique beliefs, which they passed down from generation to generation in their hymns. Doukhobors believe that the Spirit of God exists in every man. For them, killing is a sin, even in times of war. So in Russia, Doukhobor men refused to join the army. This infuriated Russia's Tsarist leaders. In 1894, Tsar Nicholas II passed a decree forcing the Doukhobors to join the army. Those who refused were punished. In 1895, thousands gathered in the region now called Georgia to stage a protest against war. They burnt their guns, pistols, and swords. Many of the Doukhobor protesters were arrested and then sent into exile. The crackdown on the Doukhobors continued until Russian author Leo Tolstoy decided to help. He too was a Christian and a pacifist, and he raised enough money to send 7,000 Doukhobors to Canada in 1899. Just an hour away from Grand Forks is the city of Castlegar, BC, where I'll hear the story of a Russian Doukhobor woman called Anna Markova. In 1935, Anna vanished into the wastelands of Siberia, where the Soviet government had set up a network of brutal labor camps for political prisoners. Her family and friends in Canada had no idea where she was, and yet Anna's history was inexorably linked to their own. I'm Susan Poisner, and my host Audrey Reppin and her family will help tell the tale. Hello, I'm Susan.
Hi, Susan. Pleased to meet you.
Audrey and her husband Peter have two daughters. Kalina is 12 years old and Tasha is 14. Their great-grandmother Nellie Voikin knew Anna Markova well.
She was a friend of Grandma's, and because you associate a spiritual group together, so you're working on ladies' committees and building the community.
And you girls, have you heard stories of Anna Markova?
Yes, many. At Sunday school and from our grandparents and parents, especially our mom.
Would you girls be interested in investigating the story, finding out a little bit more about Anna's life with us in the next...
Yes. Definitely. Definitely.
Whenever we have a family dinner like this, we always sing a song. This is genuine homemade borscht.
Before I delve further into the story of Anna Markova, I have the chance to taste some of the Doukhobor's traditional foods. Our investigation can continue tomorrow. The Doukhobors who came to Canada looked to a man called Peter the Lordly Verigin as their leader. Peter was Anna Markova's grandfather. He believed in the importance of hard work and simple living, so he encouraged his people to live in communes like this one. Our guide today grew up here as a young girl.
That where you walked in front, that was our kitchen, and this was the living room. Another family lived on the other side. That's all the dishes we had, what fitted in there. It was always dark going up. Upstairs, here's only bedrooms. There is one stove. This is an iron.
Mm-hmm. Really? An iron?
Yeah. And then roll them like this.
Did you play with dolls like that?
No, we had homemade dolls.
Oh. So you'd sew them together?
Wide open.
Ooh, it's probably so dull. What was your nicest childhood memory?
As soon as we get up in the morning, have breakfast, you hurry going out to play. And then all of a sudden you're in the middle of the game and mom calls, Nurka, come and clean the dishes.
Up to 25 people would live in each Doukhobor communal home. The women would take turns in the kitchen, cooking for the families. Everyone would share the work in the fields. But when the men were away working, if they couldn't afford oxen, the women would harness themselves to the plows. Tasha and Kalina's ancestors were amongst those first settlers. But while Anna's grandfather led their group to Canada, his own son, Anna's father, chose to stay in Russia. This decision would bring Anna much suffering in life. Doukhobor writer Jim Popoff is an expert in the history of Anna Markova. He interviewed Anna in the 1970s for an article published in the Doukhobor youth magazine, Mir.
Anna Markova was born in 1902 at a time when her family, her father and his family were still living in what is now Georgia. Got married there to her first husband, John Boykin. That group of Doukhobors moved to the Rostov-on-the-Don area of Russia in 1921.
The men moved to Rostov-on-Don to build a new settlement, but the conditions were hard, and Anna's husband died there. She was 6 months pregnant at the time.
She was widowed before her son John was born, and she took it very hard. Seeing her distraught condition, her father suggested that he and his wife would look after their grandson. And although he was growing up in their household, she was present and never had the notion that she would be parted from him.
In 1924, Peter the Lordly died, and it was up to Anna's father to take over the mantle of leadership in Canada. He decided to take Anna's son John with him. By then, Anna had remarried a man called Ivan Markov, and she had another son.
When it became clear that her father wished to take her son with him to Canada, she began to become very distraught. In Moscow, she actually literally had to part from her son. And he was only 6 years old, and so she had to be physically pried away from her son. And he was put on the train with his grandmother, and she saw the last glimpse of him as he was waving from the train. And this was such a heartrending scene that she started running after the train and literally ran after it and passed out, fell down into the ditch alongside the train, and then she wasn't to see him for another 32 years.
So while most of her family were now in Canada, Anna, her second husband, and her younger son stayed behind in Russia, where the political climate was changing. After the Bolshevik Revolution, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin consolidated his grip on power. In order to subdue the population, he sent millions of innocent people into prison camps in the barren wastelands of Siberia. Many never returned.
Anna Markova was arrested by the Soviet authorities during what was known as the Stalin period. There were a lot of repressive measures taken against people who might consider to be working against the interests of the state. The Doukhobor community was religiously based, and although they had their own communal organization, they did not take very easily to the political impositions upon them from the Soviet state. And so those who were considered to be more responsible in the community, or potential ringleaders of the Doukhobor religious sectarian movement, were generally persecuted in one fashion or another. In a simple word, Anna Markova was arrested merely because of her family associations, because she was a relative of the Doukhobor leadership.